On this edition of In the Life,
queer comic strip characters, preserving lesbian culture.
This was an archives that belonged to the people who lived its history.
And AIDS and the artistry of dance. Plus, a love story of operatic proportions. And special guest host, Kate Clinton. All this and more on In the Life, America's gay and lesbian news magazine. In the Life is funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation. Additional support provided by William J. Resnick, Rick Weiland, the Arcus Foundation, the Colin Higgins Foundation, the Snowden Foundation, the Mitchell Gold Company, in the hopes of eliminating all types of fear and prejudice. And the annual support of In the Life members like you.
welcome to In the Life. I'm Kate Clinton. This year marks my 20th anniversary as a performer. For those of you who give gifts for such things, I am registered at Walmart. And during that time, I've made a number of appearances on In the Life. As a matter of fact, I hosted the first episode back in 1992, and I've been back several times as a guest correspondent. On this edition, we'll show you some of the best stories on art and culture In the Life has aired over the years. Whether on stage or screen, from choreographers to cartoons, if it's about gay men or lesbians, chances are In the Life has covered it. On this episode, correspondent Darius DeHaas spotlights two theater companies presenting Shakespeare with a twist. Jonathan Capehart profiles two performers dancing for life. And Alan Tulin looks at some comic strip characters who live up to the name, the Funnies. But first, this first story originally aired on the eve of the new millennium, and it profiles an institution whose mission is close to my heart, making sure that the past is not lost to the future. Back in the 1970s, lesbians were becoming a vocal and highly visible political presence in American life. But a group of women feared that much of this history was being distorted or going undocumented altogether. They decided that lesbians should be the ones to present and preserve their own stories. As In the Life series host Catherine Linton reported, they've been keepers of the culture for more than a quarter of a century.
We began talking about how easily our history had gotten lost.
That we didn't want our story to be told by, quote, a patriarchal history keeper. I didn't want our story to be told by those who called us freaks to begin with.
And that if we didn't do it, nobody was going to do it for us.
Joan Nessel and Deb Adel are two of the founders of the Lesbian Herstory Archives in New York, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. For all of those years, they have been collecting the writings, photographs, publications, T-shirts, buttons, in fact, all of the materials that tell the many histories of lesbian lives. And for almost 20 of those years, the entire collection was housed in Joan Nessel's own apartment.
This wasn't going to be a one-night stand. It was going to be a long-term relationship. We had a commitment to the archives that, one, it had to be a lifelong commitment, because just think, if an archives doesn't outlast at least one generation, it's not an archives. So it started in a back room, and my mother was living here at the time. And it was this, we'd have these meetings around the table. My mother would come out without her teeth in, and she'd say, "Very good, girls, very good."
If it's done by a lesbian, we collect it. If it's thought about by a lesbian, we collect it. If it's written by a lesbian, if it's touched by a lesbian, we collect it. We have papers and diaries and journals. We have photographs.
Traditional archives have been about famous people. And from the beginning, that was not our view, that this was an archives that belonged to the people who lived its history. In the life of Mabel Hampton, which is, for me, at the spiritual heart of the archives, captures that. Because in traditional history, Mabel Hampton's story would not be told. She was a domestic worker for most of her life. She was an entertainer. She was a participant in the Harlem Renaissance. And I know Miss Hampton, and this is harder for me to talk about. At one point, Miss Hampton worked for my mother, and that's how I met her. And she was the first lesbian woman I ever knew. And the courage this woman had, as you would ask Mabel later in life, when she was here with the archives and she was living here, women would make pilgrimages to see her on Thursday night, and they'd sit at her feet, and she loved the ladies, she loved the girls, as she called them, and they'd say, well, Mabel, when did you come out? And she'd say, what do you mean, when did I come out? I was never in. A few years ago, my lover then found a T-shirt, and the T-shirt was about famous black women in history, and it listed all the famous women, Sojourner Truth, and the last name on that list was Mabel Hampton. You know, so in her 80s, she became this really out gay activist.
In 1991, after years of planning and fundraising, the Lesbian Herstory Archives bought this building in Brooklyn, New York.
We did a lot, as a group, a lot of fundraising in order to get this building. We had people giving us small donations, and we were able to put down half of the building, really, half of the cost of the building at the time of purchase, from donations, 99% of which were 25, 55.
Eventually, those small donations enabled the archives to pay off the entire mortgage.
That was a very exciting moment for us, to really realize that we could claim the mortgage, tear up the mortgage, and not be beholden to any bank or any outside group, that this was our building, the Lesbian Communities building. Here we are on the first floor in the parlor, and the books and materials that we have in this room really represent the most traditional sort of library. We have a vast collection of subject files ranging everything from newsprint to pamphlets to flyers about lesbian activities and events. And then over here we have a very special collection. This we call the Red Dot Collection. It was the library of the New York City chapter of the Daughters of Bilitis. And it really represents what lesbians were reading in the 1960s, 1950s and 60s, and it's a wonderful collection. That's the Lesbian Survival Collection. They're a wonderful collection of paperbacks from the 50s and 60s.
And I had read them myself when I came out in the 50s. That was all there was. And they were read all over this country. In fact, they were bestsellers. These were the secreted books. And some of them were very powerful. They were handbooks on how to survive as a lesbian woman.
Women who wrote under assumed names and women who wrote using their own names. They had absolutely no control of the text, the title, or the content.
If there was a sex scene between two women, a woman had to lose her child, her job, or die. So we read around the markings of hatred and control and found remarkable things.
Here we are in the dining room. We use it for exhibits. We have tapes, photography, flat art, posters, graphics, and an extensive videotape collection. The archives is run by a coordinating committee. We meet every 3 weeks, and we all sign up on the calendar for the days we're actually going to staff and be here. We don't have any paid staff. We don't have any plans at this point to have paid staff. We are part of the community, and it's our community who will keep us going. And it's absolutely paid off.
We had decided early on that the Lesbian Herstory Archives would not be what we call a role model collection, meaning that we wanted the stories of all lesbian women. And if they were sex workers, we wanted that story. And if they were S&M women, we wanted that story. All of this got even more complex when just a few years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we got the collection of a woman, a lesbian woman, who had been an FBI informant in the 50s, informing on labor movement groups. A woman who had spent much of her later life in Provincetown, ran one of the most famous lesbian tourist spots in Provincetown, and was very loved by that community, and her past very little known. And I remember one woman saying to me, very fervent woman saying, yeah, well, if there was a lesbian Nazi group, you wouldn't want their papers. And I, as a Jew, saying, we certainly would. One, we need to understand. You know, it's an uncomfortable collection, but it's important.
Now with its diverse collection and own rich history, In the Life congratulates the Lesbian Herstory Archives on its 25th anniversary.
The fact we're still here after 25 years is just amazing.
Sarah Orne Jewett, Henry Gerber, the Stonewall Inn, Bayard Rustin, the assassination of Harvey Milk. These people and events are part of a legacy rarely mentioned in traditional history books. But same-sex relationships have been part of the social and political landscape since the very beginning. And while historians have begun to recover evidence of gay and lesbian lives from throughout the past, parts of the story remain untold. In response, gay men and lesbians have created libraries and archives across the country. Major collections include the Lesbian Herstory Archives in New York, the One Institute and Archives in Los Angeles, and the James C. Hormel Gay and Lesbian Center of the San Francisco Public Library. To find a library or archive in your area, look for a link on the In the Life website at inthelifetv.org. I'm Alec Mapa, and you're watching In the Life.
Peanuts, Nancy, Popeye, Little Orphan Annie. These comic strips are part of our cartoon culture. But in a 1995 episode of In the Life, correspondent Alan Tulin introduced us to a cast of funny characters you won't find in your Sunday papers.
Comic strips are a part of the fabric of American life. And this year, the U.S. Post Office is honoring 20 of our most beloved comics with a set of commemorative stamps. None of them, as far as we know, is written by or portrays an openly gay character, though the jury is still out about Brenda Starr's best girlfriend, Hank. While a gay cartoonist may not get a postage stamp this year, there's still a strong and increasingly visible tradition of gay artists creating gay comics. One of these artists is Jennifer Camper, who started drawing for the Boston newspaper Gay Community News in the early 1980s.
I think open gay cartooning started as a result of the underground comics in the 60s. And the underground comics broke a lot of barriers and started stretching what could and could not be done in comics. What's interesting about all the different gay cartoonists is that everybody does something extremely different. And there's room for everybody right now, but you're not going to get rich. I always say that I became a cartoonist because all the equipment you need is small and real easy to shoplift.
So, what is the lure of cartooning? Why pursue an art that has so few financial rewards?
Cartoons are very accessible. You can say a lot in a cartoon that you couldn't necessarily say in another medium because cartooning is friendly. It's real. It's like candy. People come to it very open, very vulnerable, so you can really smack them upside the head with something very powerful. Humor is a very powerful weapon, and laughing at your enemies or laughing at the oppressor is the easiest way to take away their power.
Howard Cruse is an artist who spent his lifetime using humor as a weapon, and in the process has influenced nearly every gay cartoonist working today. His graphic novel, Stuck Rubber Baby, has been published by Paradox Press, and by adapting his touring slide presentation, Howard gave us at In the Life a peek into his past and present.
I was born and raised in Alabama. Dad was a preacher, and I grew up listening to sermons every Sunday. By the time I was 8, I discovered my calling in life, which is to grow up and draw a nationally syndicated newspaper comic strip. After all, America loved the funnies, so if I could get my comic strip onto the funny pages, then America would love me. My whole perspective on cartooning changed when I got turned on to underground comics. In 1979, my underground comics publisher invited me to launch a new series of underground comic books to be called Gay Comics. Then in 1983, Wendell came into my life. He fell in love with Ollie Chalmers, and their relationship quickly became the core of the strip. The last Wendell episode ran in 1989. That's because of all the time and energy it's taken to write and draw the more than 200 pages of Stuck Rubber Baby. Stuck Rubber Baby is about a guy named Tolan Polk who lives in a southern town called Clayfield, just when all the racial strife is boiling to the surface. Tolan watches resistance played out on a small scale and on the kind of scale that makes history. A lot of aspects of Tolan's hometown Clayfield come pretty directly from my own experience. From the churches that were everywhere to the exciting and welcoming gay subculture that helps Tolan know that he's not alone. Another location in my novel that's based on somewhere real is the Melody Motel. As you can see, it's getting bombed in this drawing. The Melody plays an explosive role in Tolan's life, and I mean that metaphorically as well as literally, because it's not just a motel's bricks and mortar getting blown apart in Stuck Rubber Baby. It's everything that's log-jammed and hidebound in a Southern boy's psyche.
I think a good cartoon is one that makes people react. It can make them angry, it can make them laugh. The worst cartoon is one that you just turn the page.
For this month's In the News, New York's Town Hall hosted a sold-out reading of the cult classic, Caged, to benefit the AIDS service agency, God's Love We Deliver.
Tom and I had only been married a couple of months. We tried to find a place to live, but everything cost so much. I finished Joe off for good.
Isabella Rossellini, Varla Jean Merman, and Charles Bush were among the artists who lent their talents to raise $75,000 for food and nutrition services to men, women, and children living with HIV/AIDS. Broadway stars gathered at the world-famous Apollo Theater in February for an unprecedented evening of music and dance to benefit the Harlem United Community AIDS Center and Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS. With performances by artists such as Three Mo Tenors, the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater, and Jennifer Holliday, the event was a tribute to the talent and contributions of African-American speakers and performers. The evening also served to draw attention to the continuing tragedy wrought by AIDS and the disproportionate number of African Americans affected by the disease.
As a singer-songwriter, I've performed for audiences all across this country and around the world. One thing all of these places have in common is the reality of AIDS. In the spirit of social justice, many faith-based organizations have established national networks to offer AIDS services for their members. The efforts of these congregations and other communities of faith include HIV prevention, meal services, food banks, housing and education programs. The Council of National Religious AIDS Networks is a coalition of many of these Buddhist, Christian, and Muslim faith groups. And if you would like to get involved, this coalition is a great place to start. To find the link to this comprehensive network, go to the In the Life website at inthelifetv.org. I'm Jeanie Cunningham for In the Life.
With his plots about mistaken identity and cross-dressing characters, Shakespeare certainly taught us a thing or two about gender bending. In the Bard's time, boys would be boys and boys would be, well, girls, since all of the roles, both male and female, were played by men. In 1998, we spotlighted two theater troupes that had returned to the tradition of same-sex casting. R&J, the all-male production of Romeo and Juliet, became the longest-running version of Shakespeare's tragedy ever staged in New York. This summer, director Joe Calarco begins shooting a film adaptation. Here's Darius DeHaas reporting on the original production.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. This theater season in New York, an all-male adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, called R&J, has been wowing audiences with the driving energy and erotic fervor of adolescence. Of boys who will be young men.
Give me your pardon, sir. I have done you wrong.
In Los Angeles, a theater company has been getting raised for its all-women productions of Shakespeare.
Don't you? I'll know more on it. It has made me mad.
But what is revealed when same-sex casting is used to explore the passion, violence, and theatrical thrill of the world's greatest English-language playwright?
That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet.
With R&J, director Joe Calarco's attention getting twist was to stage Romeo and Juliet as a play within a play, being read in secret as a scandalous story of sex and violence by 4 boys in a repressive prep school.
Draw thy tool. Here comes of the house of Montague.
The result? A striking exploration of forbidden love.
Through doing the play, through doing Romeo and Juliet, since it being such a passionate play about sex and violence and rebellion, they experienced those things themselves. The idea of the school was to mirror the world that Romeo and Juliet live in, was to find a place that was very repressive, had very strict rules about what a man is, what a woman is.
Society. Without women, men soon resume the savage state, and the comforts of the home are exchanged for the misery of the mining camp.
By doing the play and experiencing those sort of passions, they learn about freedom.
If thou dost love, pronounce it faithfully. Or if you think I am too quickly won, I'll frown and be perverse and say thee nay, so thou wilt woo.
Since it being all men, of course it has a huge resonance, especially their first kiss. It's the first time I've seen that scene where it actually worked to me, that it seemed dangerous and sexy. And you can go back to when you're a teenager and you kiss your first boy. It's sort of terrifying and sexy at the same time. And
give him my sin again.
A word we talked about a lot in rehearsal was danger. The danger of this age and the passion of this age in terms of where people are just beginning to really discover sexuality.
Thou shalt not.
By the fact that we are placed in this very structured environment, it really lends itself to, I think, what the 2 young people in the play are going through, because they're not allowed to be together, and yet they have all these feelings that they want to express.
By the end of the play, the schoolboy has learned so much about his feelings, and the journey has taken him to a different spot where he's not going to just conform and go back to the old life, but that he's had some enlightenment about who he is.
they go from real homophobia to an acceptance of understanding and saying that it's okay, that love is just love, no matter who's experiencing it.
In R&J, love is love. With the Los Angeles Women's Shakespeare Company, not only love, but hate, revenge, passion, and power also make up a landscape where, on stage, any person can tread.
Oh, woe upon thy life, my noble lord!
Their successful all-women productions of Shakespeare are proving their point.
The king now drinks to Hamlet. Hamlet!
The Los Angeles Women's Shakespeare Company exists to bring women's voices out into the world. And it's a multicultural, all-female company dedicated to producing Shakespeare at the best production values we can manufacture.
Shall relish of it. I loved you not.
I was the more deceived.
Get thee to a nunnery.
It's an all-female company because women are multi-layered and they're capable of so much. So when you do Shakespeare, which is the best writing in the English language, it really takes you on a journey. And when you play the male roles, which are fully written, you really get to show a range of thought and feeling.
Oh, if thou dost slander her and torture me, never pray more!
Now, with Los Angeles Women's Shakespeare, we all are women who want to do Shakespeare.
If there are poisons, knives, cords, or suffocating streams, I could endure it. Would I were satisfied!
Fran Bennett has worked with numerous regional theater companies as well as in film and on television.
Would, nay, and I will!
But she was drawn to Los Angeles Women's Shakespeare because it offered a new challenge.
The possibility of playing roles that you do not get an opportunity any place in the world to play. Roles that are big in passion, in desire, in love, in everything. There's nothing small about Shakespeare.
My great revenge had stomach for them all.
As a woman, we're very seldom ever asked to be strong, to go that big, to really be powerful.
Down, strumpet! You mean tomorrow let me lift it high? And if you strive?
The idea is to transcend the limitations of gender, all the boundaries, all the stereotypical boundaries of what women can do or are.
For Los Angeles women Shakespeare, the importance of transcending limitations and boundaries goes beyond just a hunger for meteor roles. The technical crew for the troupe is also made up of all women.
There's nothing more astonishing than 25 women in spandex with power tools building a world. I mean, there's more power in a tool belt than anybody knows. And there's something fabulous about building something you can stand on and walk on. And people are looking at it and saying, I built that. That's my platform. They take a router and they put their names on the bottom of the flat. They want to own it. They want ownership, and they've got it.
Getting a room full of women who have a goal, the power that they can produce is amazing. To put up 20-foot walls or build 3-level story platforms. It's a huge team. The last production that we had, it was 50 women and girls working together. I can't tell you how many times I had some of these young girls come up to me and just say, you know, they were amazed that we had built this and that it was all women doing it.
An all-women company has raised the inevitable question.
You do get that question, is it a lesbian company? For the most part, less than 1/3 of the company is a lesbian or an out gay person. There's mothers, there's wives, there's, you know, women bring their children to come down and help on the set. It really makes for a much more family atmosphere.
For Lisa Wolpe and Mia Torres, who are both gay, they know that being open about their sexuality can create further restrictions in an industry already short on strong opportunities for women.
The prejudice will stop you from working. I know that being out can further limit the career of a professional. I know that in Los Angeles, where most of the production people either are gay or are really aware of their gay friends, they either won't talk about it or they'll have a double standard about it. It's not, it's still not safe, but it's a heck of a lot better than it was 20 years ago.
And 20 years ago, there was no Los Angeles Women's Shakespeare Company, trying to expand the limits, trying to do better Shakespeare.
Every part of me is alive when I am playing Shakespeare. I can feel it down to my toenails.
Give it vital growth again.
Shakespeare's like feeds my heart, my soul, the part of me that I think is really me. And I think one's soul needs feeding too.
Hi, I'm Wesley Snipes.
Hello, I'm Susan Sarandon. This is Petula Clark.
Pete Seeger.
David Marshall Grant.
Quentin Cruse.
Jason Alexander.
We're Betty.
And you're watching.
You're watching.
You are watching.
America's Emmy-nominated gay and lesbian news magazine.
In the Life.
In the Life.
In the Life.
Now, I think that's fabulous.
Still to come on In the Life.
Darius DeHaas returns with a love story of operatic proportions. And author Kate Bornstein with a true crossover artist. But first...
Art is often created out of adversity. And in our next segment, Jonathan Capehart spotlights 2 performers whose works are informed by their experiences with HIV and AIDS.
When HIV-positive choreographer Bill T. Jones debuted Still Here in New York in 1994, the revealing piece was a painful acknowledgement that perhaps no other artistic community has been as hard hit by HIV and AIDS as the world of dance. Like Jones, Chris Ramos and David Rousseve are 2 choreographers whose work and lives have been shaped by the epidemic. David Rousseve is a Los Angeles-based dancer, choreographer, and performance artist whose critically acclaimed company, David Rousseve Reality, tours internationally, performing mixed-media dance operas which incorporate spoken word,
if you take this
modern dance, live gospel music, and historical narratives, including those of his own Creole ancestors.
Since she was the darkest of us all, they'd give my Bammy all the hardest cotton to pick.
In 1992, we did a piece called Urban Scenes Creole Dreams that was our first very large, full-length work. And that was about juxtaposing my grandmother's life, who was an elderly Creole woman in the swamps of Louisiana in the early 1900s, with contemporary urban America.
We get it right. Radio stations are questioning their blackness. They call us a black, but we'll see if the greatest.
Rousseve's most recent work, Love Songs, appeared recently at New York's Brooklyn Academy of Music. Love Songs finds inspiration in Wagner's tragic opera Tristan and Isolde, adapting the Celt myth to create a story of two Southern slaves whose forbidden love flourishes under cover of the night.
I knew that I wanted to create some sort of a dialogue about love, and it seemed like a lot of our social ills are due to the fact that we are seemingly losing our ability to be compassionate with each other.
I beg you, Sarah, do not let him destroy our love, for without each other we have nothing but the cruelty of day's light.
I didn't want it to be an easy statement about love. While certainly it's a romantic piece, I really didn't want to shy away from just the fact that for me, life and love are very complicated.
I think I love you.
Weirdo.
And there's a certain bleakness, which is why the piece refers to Tristan and Wagner quite a bit, because that's actually a morbid story, Tristan. You know, they're kind of infatuated with the night, but in fact they're saying they want to kill themselves and cross over to death and not to love each other eternally.
Dance historians argue that the legacy of AIDS has been preserved in a great deal of today's choreography. Since Rousseve's work deals with forbidden relationships, HIV and AIDS are hard to miss.
Well, I think because the company members are from so many different communities that have been affected by AIDS, all of us have had some personal experience, whether it's the company's primarily African-American, also primarily gay. It's a downtown dance company. So certainly the dance community, the black community, the gay community have all been so devastated.
When you go from
Choreographer Chris Ramos has been addressing that same reality. His New York-based company, Ramos Dance, has been characterized by critics as explosive, lyrical, and athletic, but powerfully controlled.
My style is pretty much, people say it's quite lyrical, but I call it lyrical with an edge. It's very, very athletic. It's kind of non-stop, going from one person to another. They are dancing together as one. They are dancing together as a group. And there's a sense of community. There's a sense of involvement with one another.
Until recently, Chris Ramos's work had steered clear of topical themes. But as Ramos explains, his first commissioned solo piece could hardly avoid the topic which has so strongly altered his existence.
My partner in life for the last 10 years, lover, passed away, and he died of AIDS.
Hello, how are you doing?
Better, way better, Doc.
Makes sense. You've responded well to the new drug cocktail.
And the thing that I'm dealing with right now, I'm HIV positive for the last 3 years. So that's something I've been dealing with, facing the reality, as they say.
Viramune ACT DDI Delavudine Ritonavir.
There's a gesture with the gun. It's the same thing with touching with the crotch, because your crotch is an HIV positive. That's a lethal weapon.
Creative energy drives the dancers, but the physical stamina it takes to maintain a dance career is greatly compromised by HIV.
I have two professions. I'm a bookkeeper, a computer analyst for a company in New York City, and I also run a dance company of 6 dancers plus myself.
To qualify for health insurance, most dancers must work full-time jobs. but their medication regime can prove devastating to their art.
Your livelihood, you know, and also your art is dependent upon your body. You know, a painter has a canvas, but a dancer has his body. That's our tool.
While choreographers like Ramos and Rousseve are making individual statements about AIDS in their work, they are also coming together in benefit performances to raise badly needed funds for the fight against the disease. Helping to coordinate these efforts is Dancers Responding to AIDS, an organization formed in 1991 by Paul Taylor dancers Hernando Cortez and Denise Roberts.
We are a fundraising program of Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS, and the money that we raise through this event and various other special events, we pool together with the money that they raise.
So the money that we raise helps people with their rent, their insurance payments for their car, for continued medication.
Health insurance, utilities, basic life needs for people living with AIDS.
Every year, the organization hosts the Remember Project at St. Mark's Church in New York City.
1999 celebrates our 5th year for the Remember Project, and it's a 12-hour celebration of dance. It's a remembrance of those dancers who were lost to AIDS.
When people talk in numbers about a group of people dying or being lost, a number means one thing, but a name means something else. When you can see a list of names of people, it just makes it a more profound statement.
I think one of the powers of choreography and of movement is to really transcend our difference and to speak about what we all have in common, to really speak on a universal level. That dance and its ability to do just that becomes more and more important.
As a writer-director, my profession involves working with lights, camera, and actors. But for me, whether in front of the camera or on the set, it all boils down to telling a compelling story. One continuing saga that demands our attention is the AIDS epidemic. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, adolescents and young adults ages 13 to 24 are the single most likely group to contract a sexually transmitted disease. And young gay and bisexual males are particularly likely to engage in high-risk behavior like unprotected sex, and so are especially at risk for HIV infection. The AIDS crisis is far from over. Even though we've made some progress, HIV remains a serious, sometimes fatal disease that requires complex, costly, and difficult treatments that don't work for everyone. To learn more about HIV and how to stay safe, visit the In the Life website at inthelifetv.org. I'm Mark Christopher for In the Life.
On this month's In the Arts, we spoke with award-winning author Thomas Glave about his debut collection, Whose Song and Other Stories.
Whose Song, the book has been doing really well so far, commercially and critically. It's perhaps because it has appealed to so many different people, African Americans, Caribbean people, Caribbean Americans, gay and lesbian people, all different sorts of audiences.
He, Gregory, was a little that way.
The collection of stories has been praised by both critics and writers for its use of differing perspectives and how they inform issues of racism and homophobia.
I was very curious about the idea of the story itself asking this question: whose song, whose narrative, whose tale to tell, whose history, whose responsibility, etc. And it seemed to me finally that in the final sort of vision of the book, that question itself was very pertinent for all the sorts of realities and metaphors that the book embraced.
These African clothes and things. She had some fancy hairstyle one day, all curls and twists, and I thought it looked great, kind of foreign almost.
Glave has been compared to authors such as Richard Wright and James Baldwin for his exploration of African American, gay, and Caribbean history and culture.
I see the situation for gay and lesbian writers of color right now as very, very interesting because I think that there are lots of conversations going on culturally as well as within the parameters of sexuality. It's very exciting for me, for example, to see what's happening in Black lesbian and gay writing right now because of the awareness, I think, that many Black lesbian and gay writers have of the history that preceded in terms of African American literary traditions and how their writing speaks historically to that writing, and that writing, of course, also speaks to theirs.
And on Showtime this spring, an adaptation of Armistead Maupin's Further Tales of the City.
I knew that we were making groundbreaking television when we first filmed Tales of the City. I knew it. The more we see our own lives reflected in other people, the better we feel about ourselves. And the more different those people are, seemingly to us, the more that validation occurs.
Laura Linney and fellow Tales of the City veteran Olympia Dukakis star in this third installment of the popular series.
I can't think of any situation where an ensemble of actors are hired and they come together once every 3 or 4 years and produce and continue the story. It's not about us who are in it. It's about how great the story is and how great it is that it's been made, and that's the most fulfilling feeling in the world.
I believe that there's a part of all of us that isn't gay or straight or male or female or of any particular race, but simply human. I think we do things, we react in our hearts in much the same way.
In our next segment, we look at the life of a musician who can truly be called a crossover artist. Author and guest correspondent Kate Bornstein profiles a jazz pianist who faced the music about his gender choice and in doing so found a more honest expression of his art.
Dorothy Lucille Tipton was born in Oklahoma City in 1914 to a family that encouraged her passion for music from a young age. Her goal was to play professionally in a jazz band. There was just one problem. Women in the jazz business usually took a back seat to the men, and Dorothy wanted time in the spotlight. As biographer Diane Middlebrook explains, Dorothy found an unusual solution to achieve her goal.
She was going to go audition for a job, and in order to get it, she was going to put on men's clothes. She put on a man's jacket, slicked her hair back, went off, auditioned for the job, got the job, went on the road, came home with money in her pocket, and from that day on, they said, she never looked back. She saw that this was the way that she was going to be able to get what she wanted, which was work in a band.
Defying the odds, Billy Tipton carved out a career in the music business that lasted more than 40 years.
Billy made his living playing music, and that was hard to do. He wasn't a star, he wasn't a recording star, for example. He was never on television and never made it big, but he had a very solid professional life.
On stage and in his private life, Billy guarded his secrets so well that 4 of his 5 wives, his 3 adopted sons, and most of the musicians that he worked and traveled with said that they didn't suspect that Billy was anything other than he seemed.
Dorothy found in herself the ability to be an entertainer, an actor, acting the role of a musician as well as playing the music, and that double identity was Billy Tipton.
Jameson Green, founder of FTM International, a support group for female-to-male transgendered people, suspects that there may have been another factor in Billy's choice besides his love of music.
Maybe he put it on as a way to get a job in the beginning, or maybe that's just what he told people because it was a safe thing to say. But ultimately, there's a place where this becomes who you are, and to take that identity off means not being yourself anymore. So in that way, Billy Tipton's experience much more closely relates to the kind of experience that trans people have. As he was living as a man, he was able to express himself as a man and able to actualize that identity.
Was Billy Tipton a role played with consummate skill by an enterprising and talented actress? Or was Billy the real personality of the girl born as Dorothy? Billy left no memoirs or records, so there's no way of knowing for certain what his true motivations were.
He did say to one of his cousins, you know, I'm a normal person. I'm not a freak, I'm not a hermaphrodite. This has been my choice. This way of life has been my choice.
The important thing to be understood about trans people is that they aren't being who they are not. They are being who they are. Billy described himself as a musician and as a man. the most important thing about honoring Billy is not to take those identities away from him.
In 1998, a history-making opera premiered in New York as part of Lincoln Center's Summer Festival. It was a love story between two women who built a life together more than a century ago. Here again is Darius DeHaas with his report on this cultural milestone.
Patience and Sarah had its beginnings as an underground novel written by Isabella Miller. The book, which quickly became a cult classic, was based on the real-life story of folk artist Mary Ann Wilson and her companion, Miss Brundage. For some, including Wendy Persons, the librettist of Patience and Sarah, these 19th century lesbian pioneers have become heroes and muses.
I think we're looking for lesbian folk heroes. I think we need lesbian folk heroes in our life, and to find seeds and to find sources, to find people like Mary Ann Wilson and Miss Brundage is very inspiring to us.
An exhibition of Mary Ann Wilson's work was mounted at the Museum of American Folk Art across the street from Lincoln Center in conjunction with the festival. Laurie Phillips, who plays Patience in the opera, drew her inspiration from the paintings by Patience's real-life counterpart.
It was amazing to see some of the color choices. I think that it helped me to identify the character in her choices, her bold choices.
I love the book Patience and Sarah. I've loved it since I read it in the early 1970s. And in 1981, I had a mad crush on a soprano who said to me, "Wouldn't Patience and Sarah make a great opera?" And I thought, yeah. And I went home and immediately sat down and wrote the libretto. I had never thought about writing an opera libretto before. I'm an opera fan. I'm a fan of the book Patience and Sarah, and I desperately wanted to impress the soprano. And that's how it all started.
When I met Wendy in 1989, within a few minutes of my telling her I'm a composer, she said she had a libretto to Patience and Sarah. And since I was a composer, maybe I could write this opera.
I love the way Isabella Miller has written the words. I was able to lift dialogue intact over and over and over again from the book. And then Paula added the music to them, and suddenly they took on a whole new life of their own. This is something that music does to a piece anyway, to add a layer of emotion, the depth of emotion that comes with music.
The scene in which Patience and Sarah kiss for the first time is very important because it pushes us right through the doorway. If we were still wondering, is this going to be a story where the women are really close but we don't really know? Or is this really going to be an openly sexual lesbian relationship we're talking about here? And with that kiss, you know we're going to portray this. This is not going to be fried green tomatoes, where we love this story and these women are having such an interesting... Do you think they're gay? No, we know what this story is from that moment.
Interestingly enough, even though the subject matter, the lesbian subject matter, is fairly radical, our opera, Patience and Sarah, is very traditional. I'm very old-fashioned. I like stories, and Patience and Sarah is a story. Girl meets girl, girl loses girl, girl gets girl. 3 acts, plain and simple. I've found a number of people who have been frightened by the idea that it's an opera. But everyone who comes is drawn into the story and loves the music. You know, maybe people laugh a little bit at the beginning when they go, oh my gosh, they're singing, they're sopranos. But within minutes, you can hear a pin drop.
I am completely knocked out. I think it's absolutely wonderful. The costumes, the set, the way the people move on stage, the music itself, and the story. It's just wonderful. Totally delightful.
Well, I think it's the first lesbian-themed opera, and that has a certain sociological value. To me, the most exciting thing is that it's beautiful to listen to.
Women's voices have sounded together in other operas, not quite in the explicit romantic way that they do in Patience and Sarah. In many operas, a woman is playing a man. She gets to sing a duet with a woman who's playing a woman. They get to sing really gorgeous music together. I'm sure I'm not aware of any other operas where it is as two women being two women, making love to each other and singing. That I don't think that's ever been done before in a full-length opera.
Patience and Sarah ran for 3 memorable nights that summer to sold-out audiences in New York. And as composer Paula Kimper told us, the beautiful thing about opera is that it's a repeatable experience. Last year, Patience and Sarah premiered in Chicago, Denver, and Maine. For all of us at In the Life, thank you for watching, and see you next month.
In the Life is funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation. Additional support provided by William J. Resnick, Rick Weiland, the Arcus Foundation, the Colin Higgins Foundation, the Snowden Foundation, the Mitchell Gold Company, in the hopes of eliminating all types of fear and prejudice. And the annual support of In the Life members like you.